to build pride in forestry, we have to ask what to be proud of exactly, right? So we're going to get into the public perception and all that kind of stuff. But first of all, I wanted to talk to both of you guys, Jason and Kevin, talking about why are you guys in forestry? Why did you decide to literally sell hours of your life, giant chunks of your life, possibly a third of your life, you decided to dedicate towards this cause of forest management? And why? Like, what's your why? Why would you do that, right? So I want to know where that pride comes from. Like, what's getting you up every day? What's that purpose, right? So, Jason, I thought I'd start with you because you're relatively new to this position at the AFPA here, and you've had a lot of experience with government and ministerial positions and that kind of stuff. And I just thought it'd be cool to start off talking about, let's say, before you were Deputy Minister of Agriculture and Forestry. So that was 2015, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So pre going into that, what, if you can look back, what do you think you thought of forestry, if you thought of it at all?
Pre-2015, I became Deputy Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development in 2013. When government changed in 2015, they actually pulled the forestry division out of a different department and actually merged it with agriculture. So it became Agriculture and Forestry. So really blessed to actually start meeting with the whole gamut of people within the forestry sector. And it just struck me how positive and passionate the forestry sector people are, back then were, and still are. And that's what I always kind of had planted a seed in my head. I'm going to use a forestry analogy here, planting seeds. Exactly. Just how passionate and how they're steeped in everything related to forestry. And so that seed that was planted back in 2015, I moved departments shortly after actually being part of agriculture forestry, moved into an economic development ministry. But I never lost sight of the passion that the forestry sector and the members had. And so when I was looking to have a bit of a switch in my career, I'd been with government 19 and a half years, blessed with a great run. But last fall, my predecessor in this role tapped me and said, I'm looking to retire. You should give it some thought. The board's going to run a competitive process, but I'm going to put your name forward with about half a dozen others, but I really think you should give it some thought. So in planting that seed that he did for me last fall, I threw my name in the hat for the role, and every interview that I had with my board executive, I had 4 interviews to get this position, got me more and more excited about not only the sector, but the vision going forward. And, something that really struck me through that process, and even in 2015, the seed was planted, but how renewable the sector is. And it's a very positive, forward-looking, we have our challenges. Yes, we have fiber access issues that we have to pay attention to, and working our way through that complex media issue of caribou and mountain pine beetle, and we have softwood lumber challenges with the U.S. But still, it's a very positive forest sector that actually has major impact on people's lives. So to me, in my mind, I joined to become a part of a positive, growing, renewable industry. And having been in this chair just only a few months, I get more and more excited and passionate every day that I come into this role, getting out to the different mills, seeing the passion that the mill owners and operators have. I was down, one of our members in southern Alberta had a full day tour of their facility. They use 100% of their products, fully renewable, and you could, in talking to the general manager there, he had goosebumps talking about the work they do and all of the products they use and the impact positive they have on the community. And that kind of enthusiasm is infectious. And so that, in my mind, juices me to be here every day and to really have a positive impact and work with our members, with our board, with our committee structure to advocate on their behalf, whether it's provincially to the government here or federally or within the community to tell our narrative in a deeper, more meaningful way.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. So I guess we'll go over to Kevin and see. So your positions, your background is a little bit different. So, yeah. I wanted to get into your why, right? Why are you in this position? Why have you been in this position for as long as you have? What gets you up every day and going? Because I think that's the whole question we're trying to answer here, right? Why should people be proud of forestry and be attracted to forestry? And we have to be able to answer that ourselves, right? In order to describe it to others. So what's your deal?
So, I come almost completely different from Jason in as much as I was born and raised in a logging camp. My father was in the industry, my grandfathers, my uncles. I grew up in it. And so it was less about a cognitive decision around forestry versus something else, as it was just the natural progression of where you went. There were two things that I picked up on in terms of both of you. One was a reference to family, passionate and the like. And that was something that I came to appreciate because that was the norm. The norm is you knew people, you knew family in the industry, but I had lots of uncles. It was uncle this or uncle that, and they were just friends of my parents, and so it's a very family type relationship that you build within that sector. The second was you made a reference to corporate, and what I never thought about was forestry as a corporate job, or the industry as a corporate job, and that appealed to me as I came up through high school and university and the like. Is I could choose to go corporate, or I could choose to go to forestry. Like there was that differentiation, which, in hindsight, you start to kind of peel it away, because then you start talking about the natural engagement with the forest resource and the communities that you're in, and there's smaller communities and they're closer. But it was never viewed as a job. It was a lifestyle. And so a lot of sort of the justification of why am I here and why am I excited to be in the industry were really things that evolved over time. And it was, I was living the lifestyle and then came to appreciate all the values of the lifestyle that forestry offers. And small town, the family engagement, the sustainability and the renewable element, the integration of all the different parts of the industry. These were things that were not part of a cognitive decision at 18 to do. It was at 18, well, where would you or why would you go anywhere else? And I think what it does, though, is it really paints an interesting juxtapose, because when you look at our industry, you have those people who have no exposure, or they have a perspective from the outside. And a big portion of the urban population in any province is like that. And then you have the perspective of those that are in the industry. And it doesn't necessarily mean they're working in the industry, but they're in the small towns and the communities that make up the provinces. And for them, it's just a normal, reasonable approach to life. And it goes so far beyond the business of forestry as much as it is the lifestyle of forestry, the lifestyle of living in those smaller communities, the fishing, the hunting, the renewable nature. And so we've really got, when we get to the point of, why are you proud? You're really talking to two different audiences. Those that know it, in which case you never have to ask somebody in a small community like Whitecourt or Fort McMurray or whatever, are you proud of forestry? Like they'd look at you and say, well, what kind of conversation is that? Or those that don't know the industry. Because I think you're hard pressed to find anybody that is willing to sit down and have a rational, thoughtful discussion around the challenges and the opportunities that this industry, and not come away with an appreciation for it. And so if you can get in those conversations, then you're well on your way. A colleague of mine has often said, facts are friendly. Like, we have nothing to be ashamed of. We have everything to be proud of. We just need to be able to get into the conversations to allow those that have no perspective to build a perspective on the industry. So I get excited because of all the things I've come to appreciate, having already started my way down the path, which are all the same things that Jason talks about. But I was sort of on the walk already. It's sort of, you go for a walk in the woods and all of a sudden you see, wow, there's wildlife and there's trees. I never thought about that, but because I was just going for the walk down the path. It was
just part of life.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, my background's the same. Like both my parents were foresters or are foresters, I should say. And they're retired now. Was, I don't know.
One's a forester or is a forester.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And, but yeah, growing up in Slave Lake, growing up on an acreage up against the bush, and both my parents were foresters, my mother teaching forestry education and that kind of stuff to children. And yeah, same thing as with you, right? Like really, I remember being a teenager and trying to steer myself away from forestry because I didn't want to be that cliche and just follow the family business kind of thing. But then, yeah, as time went on, I was like, no, that's the one. That's what I'm doing, right? But yeah, it's interesting because it's not like even when I think about within the industry, like say people working in the mill and that kind of stuff. I don't know. Do you think a lot of them also have that same pride and that same knowledge, or do you think a lot of them is just a job?
And there's always going to be people that get up in the morning and they just go to a job. But I think if you looked at the vast majority that worked in a facility, they've come to appreciate all the things that are what this industry is about. And it isn't that they necessarily, again, cognitively sat down and said, I want to choose this, but having looked at what the opportunities are and come to appreciate what that means in terms of lifestyle and the socioeconomic implications, the sustainability, the long-term viability of the industry. I think they're all sitting there recognizing it and having pride in what they're doing, because it's so fundamental to values. It's so fundamental to the really essence of what society is. I don't think you could work in this industry and not appreciate it for what it is and still work in this industry. And so I think the people that are here have come to understand that value proposition, and therefore have built a pride and an understanding around what it means. And so I think, you might find people that are more transient in other industries that it's a job or I'm chasing money. I think in ours, it's really about appreciating what it's about. I think the forest practitioners of the world probably have a more in-depth understanding of in the fullness of time.
Of course, yeah.
But somebody who's working in a sawmill or a pellet plant are going to have the same sort of comprehension that this is a good industry to be part of. I'm proud of what we do in terms of society.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to hear that, because I would hope that they have that they're getting that connection. I don't get the opportunity to speak to them very often. So,
in fact, if I can, Matt, just to jump in and recognizing I'm just 4 months into this role, but my exposure to the mills I've visited, plus in my previous capacity as agriculture forestry, it's a calling for the individuals that I've met who work in this space, whether it's the head grader, one of the operations I visited in Edson a few weeks back, or cascading back 3-4 years ago when I was deputy of ag forestry. I actually spent a full day going up during wildfire season with our wildfire firefighters, and it is absolute passion and the calling for them. And it was just so cool being a part of that. So I think the norm in our industry is it's a passion, it's a calling. I would say there's very few, to Kevin's point, that it's just a job. Like it's a lifestyle, it's a calling. They're passionate about it. It's renewable. It's a sustainable industry, and they're proud to be a part of it.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's the perspective I have as well. So I guess moving on from there, we're talking about, when I get into the public perception, right? And so I took a little extremely biased poll yesterday via text message to a bunch of friends and family and people who I thought didn't really have any kind of ties to forestry in one way or another. Like, they know me, but I don't necessarily rant all the time about my job. So I took a little poll and asked them, kind of pre-knowing me, what did you think? Almost across the board, I didn't think about it. Like, it just wasn't, they're like, yeah, I thought it was a necessary industry, and it was, yeah, toilet paper's good, wood's good. Yeah, okay. Yeah, trees equals wood equals houses or whatever, right? And so it's not, like, I think I developed this false sense of what I thought the public thought, in that, you go online on social media or something like that, and you see all this stuff about, they're cutting down old growth forests and deforestation, and you think there's all these Facebook groups about protecting the forest and that kind of stuff, and it's easy to take that almost personally and be like, well, like, we're doing a good job, right? And so it's I thought that the public had more of a negative view towards forestry. From what I've noticed is that they actually don't think about it. So, starting with you, Jason, what do you think? What do you think the public's view of forestry is?
So, great question, Matt, and something that we're really working on with AFPA started last fall, Alberta Love Alberta Forest campaign, because there was that view, that feeling that either it's a negative view or it's just not a view that's known. And so, huge kudos to Brock Mulligan, our communications director. He worked with our public affairs committee members to strike up on this campaign, because I think there was a recognition that it was either a negative view or a not known view. They did pre-polling before phase 1 of the Love Alberta Forest campaign. Love Alberta Forest campaign was launched in early October, end of September, early October last year. Then they did some post-polling, and they were actually able to move the needle by 14%, which is a big needle for a phase 1 of a 3-year campaign.
It's huge, yeah.
So we're in the field for phase 2 will start again this coming late September, early October. So we're doing a whole bunch of product development right now, and our intent is to continue to move the needle. But the needle was moved in a positive way, and I may have maybe off by a point or two on my stats, but I'm pretty sure it's a 14% bump of people now seeing it more in either a positive light or actually just thinking about it.
Just thinking about it at all. Yeah. Yeah. I'll just put it on the public's radar. Start with that and see where we can go with it. Right. So yeah, perfect.
Do you know, there's an interesting element when it comes to education between people who take professional degrees and people who take more general and science or art. Those that come out with a professional degree know on day one what their job is going to be. All the rest of us, because I'm not a forester, come out and try to figure out what our job is going to be. We start where you were at, which was through my life, I'm going to have to sort of figure out where this path takes me. And I think professionals sort of get in that path and then try to figure out, do I step off it? And so there's a lot of peace early on when you first graduate, because there's no confusion about where you start, but it does take a certain amount of courage to take that step left or right. It's one of the things that we really like to encourage is forest practitioners in operational roles within the facilities, because what they're able to bring is a completely different perspective in terms of the industry. And we were talking about the perpetual nature and the planning cycle and these sort of things, and bring that into the operation. And so many of them, and it's not very often a forest practitioner goes to Edmonton for education with the intent of staying in Edmonton, where so many of them go there with the intent of going back out to the communities. Well, that's where all the operational jobs are. And there's just a great perspective to bring it in. But try to talk a forest practitioner into understanding that there is something else you could do and contribute because of your skill sets or your interest or the like. And when you get them to open their eyes, it's almost like that horizon. You're sitting on a Zoom call and all of a sudden it backs up and you got a whole room of people. And it's really exciting when you get people to start thinking about what they can bring to an organization or a situation or the like, instead of seeing themselves on a path that has only one direction. And we constantly try to encourage, our foresters or forest technicians or the like, to think about what roles you might be interested in the full scope of the industry, because it isn't that's a path that you're stuck on. It is a path you can choose. And if you choose to walk it, great, that's fantastic. But if you'd like to try a different branch, I mean, because they've got management skills, they got interpersonal skills. I mean, they're not talking to trees, right? Forest practitioners out there, but they're talking to people. They've got planning skills, they got management skills, they got time management skills. They're capable of working on their own, but they also need to be able to work well together. And you get all of those attributes. Well, when you're going out looking for operations management, those are the attributes you're trying to pick people off the floor. Like, do they have the ability to do that? And they don't inherently start, in a labor job in a sawmill or a pulp mill if they've got those attributes, right? Forest practitioners do. I mean, that's the very nature of how they got through their education, right? And so it's embrace the fact that you are on a different path, because really all of us that get to where we're at, I'll guarantee you, there's not one of us that we're at your age knew we'd be sitting where we sit today.
Oh yeah. No, it's you never know, right? Where life's going to take you. It's an interesting one for sure.
I like telling people that, when they say, how'd you get where you get? I said, every time a door opened, I walked through. I had no idea what was on the other side. And the fact I didn't fall off, at the end of the building is more luck than anything else. But that's where the opportunity brings you. And so if you're happy where you're at, great, super. But if you're looking for something more in this industry, there's so many opportunities. It's just, and you talk, Jason, about the integration of the industry. The health in one is required for the health in the others, but the opportunity one begets an opportunity somewhere else. Like you don't get in ruts. And I think of some of the other industries that are prevalent, and you sort of start working down that row, and the only way you're going somewhere else is you got to, pull way back out and start. Ours, there's all this ability to cascade across, which is incredibly exciting. There is nothing rote about a natural environment, right? It's all interactions and implications and And so once you can wrap your head around the fact that doing something in this corner can affect something way over here 100 years away, there is no bounds to your ability to pick up the scope of the intricacies of a regulated industry and government relations and people and all the like.
Well, and Kevin, you're hitting on something. I don't think the public realizes that our industry thinks in 100, 200-year blocks, right? And so that's powerful. And that I speak previously about the Love Alberta Forest campaign. We use that as one of our hooks, one of our messages. And I think it was an epiphany for people. And I think that's something we need to continue to cascade out. We are 100, 200-year sector industry, not thinking, everybody thinks in quarters, but we think in the long-term horizon as we're thinking of the quarters.
And if you want a really funny meeting, you sit down, business people with a forest practitioner and let's talk about the short term, because one's talking next week, next month, and the other's talking, well, within the next 3 to 5 years. Like, it's just, there's no combination. But you're right. I mean, it's this idea of longevity and sustainability. And I would bet that there are operations within Alberta that are harvesting trees that are younger than the operation in that community. And if you stop and you think about that, all of a sudden you're saying, okay, when an operation started here, that tree didn't exist. Like, if that's not sustainability, what is? And we had a tag because we were hitting some 50-year and 100-year anniversaries at some of our operating facilities. Obviously, they're not the same facilities because they upgrade over time. But you get a politician or a community member that isn't engaged in the industry, and you say that tree right there didn't exist when sawmilling started here, and their brain just goes.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I think when you think about Canadians, right? Like, when the world thinks Canada, I think a lot of times the number one thing that comes to mind is forests, mountains, moose, beavers, grizzly bears. That's like, even Canadians, we take a huge amount of pride in our forests and, the wildlife and everything, the fresh water, all of that. But there's not that connection towards the management of those forests. You know what I mean? Like, we have all this pride. And the reason we have a lot of this is because of a lot of regulation and very awesome stewards of the land that are making sure that this is sustainable forever, right? And so to connect those two dots between a huge amount of pride in Canadian forests and to connect that to the actual people that are responsible for managing that, right? Like, that's
where the pride ought to be set.
It's a couple of different streams, but one, you need to actually showcase how it affects everyday life and how it's, whether it's wood tables, whether it's, the fiber for toilet paper, whether it's the fiber for egg cartons, and actually showcasing to everyday citizens that it's in everything that we use, or not in everything, but it's in a lot of things that we use. And then we need to start telling the story behind it and the development and really showcasing the fact that it is a very sustainable, renewable resource. So we need to make sure that the hook, we need to showcase how it's important in their everyday lives, and then back it up with, did you know that for every tree that's cut down, 2 are planted, and that for once a tree is planted, there's a 14-year runway, 13 or 14-year runway, where the foresters need to actually maintain that the newly planted trees and check in on them and make sure that they continue to grow. So it's not just plant a tree and you're done. It's plant a tree and continue to actually cultivate and make sure for that 13 or 14-year horizon that that area is taken care of and nurtured and tendered. So we need to make sure that we're telling that story, that it's just not cut a tree, plant a tree, and done. There's a whole plan around it. And as Kevin was saying earlier, 100-year, 200-year horizon, our foresters think in that long-term block. And we need to make sure that message is gotten out to the general public based on the fact that they're using these everyday products, but there's a backstory behind it and a backstory to grow that next tree for that 100-year time frame when it's going to be cut down.
Thinking about how people are convinced of things, right? Like, facts are, like you said, facts are your friend, right? They're good. They help you tell the story. But I think people aren't won over without that heart portion, right? Without that why, the emotion behind it, right? Like, really why, not just facts. Because I think facts are easily dismissible. Like, you think, politically and that kind of stuff, right? Like, things get weird. People talk facts, but facts get ignored a lot of times. So when we're talking about trying to win the hearts and minds of the public, how do we, like, I think we're really good at the facts portion, right? We're really good at telling the story about, like, well, look at what we do, but the why we do it, I think, gets lost at times. You know what I mean? So how do we start to, personally, I think it starts with us. I think it starts with us trying to ask ourselves, why do we do this, and be better at telling our story. But then how do we get that across to the general public?
And I think what we have to recognize is the human element to that. And I think to your point, the facts are foundational. And an open and transparent conversation about our industry is not going to put us in a place that we shouldn't, let alone wouldn't want to engage and discuss in terms of everybody's value of the forest. And I think you're absolutely right. There is a general perspective within the populace of Canada that we're proud of who we are as a natural country and a forest and the like. I think what we need to do is bring the human element into the conversation. To your point, there are people in this industry that are proud and capable and are really the long-term stewards of that resource, and that resource on the broadest definition of the resource, not a resource as a fiber that you cut down to make something, but as a home to natural wildlife, as a recreational location. I mean, the working forest, as we refer to it, is really encompasses all of those sensitivities and priorities for the entirety of society. What we need to do is help people see the people behind that, because it isn't simply a mathematical calculation in terms of processing through, because there's a lot of people there that, quite frankly, I'm hard pressed to think of anybody who would love a forest more than a forest practitioner. I mean, there's just this inherent belief in the totality of that resource that really, if anybody ought to be talking about why we do what we do, those people that protect and enhance that resource are the starting point. And so let's talk to them. Let's engage them. The very thing that you're doing today. And you can do that from the new grad to the 10-year professional to the person nearing retirement, 30 years in. And the fact is everybody will have stories, but they're all going to be linked to that resource and all the elements that are in it. You talked about, the wildlife conservation. Well, you don't conserve wildlife if you didn't conserve the forest. If you didn't manage the forest in a way that is healthy over time, and there are natural attacks on the forest all the time, natural ones, forest or infestation or the like. The way we protect the forest and all the things that live within it or around it is by understanding that and managing it through in a way that it comes out the back end the best way it can. And to me, it gets really interesting when you end up in a conversation or you hear somebody talk about an old growth forest, because a forest practitioner will say, which species are we talking about? Because old growth with an aspen is materially different than old growth with a western red cedar, And it's so really we're talking about disturbance. Well, I'm sorry, the forest is full of disturbance, and so now are we talking natural disturbance? Because today the way we engage the forest is in as natural a format as possible. We're trying to emulate the natural disturbance. So how is that materially different if you harvest trees or they're burned by fire? More importantly, if you can avoid the burning by fire, is that not constructive? And I think when we move those elements from talking facts to the people, and and I haven't seen your Love Alberta Forestry, but I'll bet you it's landed in the people and what they're doing. And the facts are just there. I mean, they're just foundational. They're the sort of structure around the story. But it drives through that.
I seem to think that we're not very good as forest practitioners at telling our own story. Like, I wonder if that's not part of the problem here. Like, we're not.
I think we're great at telling our own story. Let me phrase it though. I think we're capable of being great at telling our own story.
Capable is different than telling our own story.
but to say you're not good at it presumes that you're trying and not doing it. I think that the fundamental part is we got to start telling our own story. And I think once you start telling your own story, the people, I mean, the characters in this industry, the people that are there, they're so interesting that once given that opportunity, what we have, and you talked about at the front end, we don't have a populace in Canada that doesn't like forestry. We have a populace that largely doesn't know it.
Just going to jump in, both Kevin and Matt. And to that point, our Love Alberta Forest campaign is really being told by those that are steeped in the industry, whether it's the owners of some of the smaller mills, whether it's some of the tree planters, the foresters that actually cultivate the plots. So we are really trying to aim. It's tugging at that emotional heartstrings you talked about earlier. Your facts are our friends, but if you're not hitting the tone on the emotion side and telling that narrative from that human element, you're missing it. So that's really what we've been trying to focus in on is, and to your point, Kevin, there are some great characters, great people in our industry. And what I love about this industry is very family focused, right from the ownership all the way through all of those that are work there. It's a long-term employment, but it really need to tell that emotional side of things, that family connection, that human connection. And so that's really what we're trying to do with this campaign, is really from those that are steeped in it, because they are the best, given the opportunity, those that are steeped in the industry are the best people to tell our story.
Yeah.
All right. So continuing with this conversation of public engagement and this kind of stuff, I have a kind of an anecdotal example of like one of the mills that I know runs into public scrutiny a lot. Like if they park somewhere, they're always getting people stopping. Sometimes they just want to talk. Other times they're livid, right? Don't understand, completely misunderstood. And they've become so good at handling it that they've figured out how to get people to understand a little bit, right? And if you talk to some of those guys, like they're a great resource for understanding that and talking to the public and trying to get them to see your perspective, and not even get them to see your perspective. That sounds almost like we're right, you're wrong. You need to learn what we know, right? I think part of what I heard from them was that we need to listen to those people, really like listen to their concerns and listen to what they're saying and try to accommodate those concerns instead of looking at it like, oh, we need to educate this person as to what we're doing. It's like, no, this person has a real concern. And you need to address this concern before they can ever move forward, because they're very emotionally attached to this, right? And they've gotten really good down there at handling that, but it's still, and those are the opportunities, I think, that present themselves to being, that person's very passionate about something. If you can get that person to be passionate about what we're doing and that it's a good thing, they're an excellent person to spout out to the world what great work we're doing, right? So I think it starts with also us taking some stock in that forestry is a privilege, right? We are managing a public resource, and it is the public's resource. And we have to recognize that because it's a public resource and we have the privilege of managing it, we have to take all opinions into account and try to adjust what we do according to that, and try to not surpass any values because we see it as less than or different than, right? So I think that's one of the awesome parts that I've kind of learned from them was that, don't try to get away from this idea of educate the public and think more about how can we see eye to eye? How do you prove that you're willing to challenge these old ideas, right? Because I think when the public does come up to you and is angry and has a bone to pick, how do you prove that, like, hey, we're not dinosaurs. Like, we're looking at how things are changing. We're trying to innovate. We're part of the future. We're part of hope. We're part of moving forward. How do we start to prove that to the public and tell that story better?
There's a couple of elements that have come up. The first is, you're absolutely right. It's not a matter of let us educate you and then you'll see the light and you'll come. I think it's really important, as you said, that we have to acknowledge that the resource is a public resource. I would probably nuance on the words a little bit more, which is our job as forest managers is to manage the forest for all of the different values that all of the public has. And sometimes the biggest task when engaging government is not to tell them what they have to do, but tell them the implications of the choices that you might make, because there are implications in all different directions. We also have to recognize that the world's not full of people that like to stand up on top of the stump and beat their chest. And so trying to find people within our industry that want to brag about how good the job is or the like. You're going to do that through conversations as opposed to podiums. But the thing that gives me a lot of hope is that when you look at especially younger people, but I would say the forest practitioners in general, you've got a lot of people that understand what we just said. And they aren't dinosaurs. They are caring individuals that care about the resource and care about the people who care about the resource. And so what we just need to do is continue to have those moments where you engage the public and you engage them where they're at on their issue. Because the moment you do that, you've got the beginnings of a discourse that will end up such that the resource is managed for the full values that it is. I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel. What we have to do is continue to put forest practitioners, who are probably the most both sensitive and educated group of people, in front of the public. And we got to help the public understand that those people are not dissimilar to the ones that are inside the facilities or inside the head offices. That passion runs through the industry. And so meet people where they are, understand what their concerns are, do what we can to balance that with the concerns of everybody else, get that dialogue going, because the dialogue helps you end up in that balance, which government, who's got the ultimate responsibility around the resource, is always looking to find, which is what's the balance of all the various interests of the entirety of society. It isn't the one who's the loudest. As you talk through the industry, you'll find that it exists in every one of the operations. And engage the public where they're at. Give them that opportunity. I mean, if you said pulling a pickup truck over with a logo on the side starts conversations, maybe we need more trucks with logos on the side starting conversations. But it's really going to be about the dialogue. Because the dialogue, again, if you're not fearful of what you're doing, then the more conversation we have, the better. And ultimately, when we talk about government engagement, government wants to find that balance. If the public aligns with the long-term best interest of that resource, the politicians aren't going to be a problem. They're trying to figure out on their end how to balance that. We just need to step up and be part of that conversation. And blogs like yours, or the Love Alberta Forestry campaigns, are all about making it real.
Yeah, absolutely. Trying to bring, and I think having those honest conversations too, right? Like not trying to pull the wool. Not that we have to pull the wool over anyone's eyes, because there's nothing to hide, like Jason said, right? I think we're very honest, and we're not trying to hide anything at all. But it's also, there's a perception, I think, from, you know what I mean, that there's the old school and the old way of thinking stuck in our ways, and we have to make sure that the public sees us as innovative and willing to change and willing to accept those new, or not new values, but the values that are coming to the forefront now. And we are, and I know we are. I'm not suggesting forestry doesn't do that. What I'm saying is we need to be perceived as doing those things, right? In order to be able, because without, like you said, without public acceptance of what we do, we don't get to do what we do. And that would be, imagine a place, a Canada, without forest management, right? Or without sustainable forest management. Like, that's a scary place, right? But the public doesn't quite know that that's the issue. So
we also need to be careful not to beat ourselves up. You're hard pressed to find an industry that 20 and 40 years ago is doing the exact same thing today. We all develop and we get better, and that's just part of engagement. And so I think, the idea in terms of, if there's a perception that we're old school, well, that's a function of people not knowing what we do today. And so it's just helping everybody advance. And it really doesn't matter what industry you are. Everybody is moving towards a broader sense of, sensibilities around the things that are important. We're no different. And it comes by younger people getting involved and saying, this is what matters. And people, my vintage, saying, great.
This whole conversation is kind of pivoted around the idea of forest practitioners and forest industry employees just being better at telling the story, telling our own story, right? Like, you can put out ads online and stuff, and those are important to have, and we need them. But I think a lot of times the untapped resource might be the people doing the work that aren't telling the story. Like you said, we can tell the story. We have the ability to tell the story, to do it well, but are we? And even I'm guilty of that, right? Of maybe just kind of like, oh, like, what do you do for work? I'm like, oh, I'm a forester. And I'm not really expanding on that, right? And I should be.
And people of your generation are far more adept technically and in terms of your engagement to engage in a much bigger platform than somebody, in my vintage. We either had to be on a podium, or standing at the back of a truck and talking to a crowd. That's no longer where you meet people.
That sounds terrifying. I don't want to do any of that.
Well, and not a lot of it happened. But if you look today, the 2-minute, the 1-minute clips, the greenest workforce, the blogs that happen. I mean, all of those are about people telling stories. And when you say to somebody, we need you to tell your story, like they have visions of fear dancing in their head. If you said, could you do a Facebook Live, for a minute and just tell people what you're doing today, like all of a sudden that just has all sorts of traction. And quite frankly, the younger generations are way more comfortable with sort of sharing what they're thinking and feeling with a broader group than the older generations. And so to your point, it's not so much making people tell their stories, or it's allowing them the fact that talk about what you do. The passion will come through.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like you have pride in what you do and you have fulfillment. Explain that. Be excited about it. I don't know why, like even in myself, I find myself, at parties or whatever and with people and, oh, like I said, what do you do? Oh, I'm a forester, and I kind of explain briefly what I do, but don't really get into it. But they're asking me genuine questions. And they deserve genuine answers. So even myself, I need to be better at really engaging that and being excited and putting emphasis on all the good things that I see going on out there, right? And so I think we all kind of need to be better at that. And I wonder if that's not part of the solution towards this, this whole workforce development thing, this building pride in forestry thing. So, how do you guys think how do we start down this route? So we've had this whole conversation. I want people to walk away with something to start with. We've got a bunch of it, but like Jason, we'll start with you. Like, what do you think people should take away from this? And when they leave this conversation, what should they try to implement in their own lives that you think would be helpful towards this cause that we're talking about?
So would hope that people realize that it's a sustainable industry, that it's filled with passionate people who are passionate about being a part of it, that it is very family friendly, that there are many different facets you can take within the forest sector. As Kevin was saying at the top of the conversation here, is you could be corporate, you could be in the field, you can be all the way in between, you can be doing a blog. That there are many different ways one could actually engage in the forestry sector. And it's fun to be a part of something that's renewable, that's sustainable, that thinks long-term, that long vision, that has some depth to it from a policy perspective, that has, you can actually get dirt under your fingers and go home satisfied that you're actually leaving a legacy for the next generation. And I think if we can continue to tell that story for those that are active and in the industry, they will continue to attract more and more people to our industry.
I think that's great, and there are platforms, be it LinkedIn or Facebook or websites that like AFPA have, where if you've gone out and done something today that you're proud of, do a little clip, share it, let people know what you're doing, and our job within industry is to continue to create those platforms or those channels to share that message, because as it gets out there, what we don't have is people that don't like us. What we have is people that don't know us. Well, clear across the country, and I mean it elevates. But if you are in the regions or the interior or the north, there's a completely different perception than if you're in the urban centers. Well, let's start sharing that, and there's some great work that's done in terms of connecting with the education groups within this province and others. We just have to continue to encourage people like yourself to share. Take a moment, ask questions, query, get on social media, and let's continue to share.
I have the podcast, and I love the podcast because it's just me and another person, or maybe two other people in a room having a conversation about things that we love. And throw it out there, and you don't have to worry about the feedback, right? I don't really worry about a lot of it on social media. But for me to actually engage in like taking photos of every day and writing what, like, it's so exhausting, but I get the importance of it.
So we aren't going to rely on you.
Don't rely on me. So rely on the people there's people who like doing that, who are good at it and enjoy it. And it's, obviously if you don't like it, I don't think you need to start forcing yourself to do anything, but even just the conversation, right? Like if you're not the person to be into social media, like as weird as it sounds, I'm not really into social media, but just the conversations with friends and family. And when you are at a party or whatever, just having a truthful conversation and just try to open up a little bit about your why. Why do you do this? Your pride, your purpose, your fulfillment, right? Like, why would you, like I said at the very beginning, why would you literally sell hours of your life towards this cause? What makes it so worthy?
On the social media, I think there's two elements. Number one is whenever somebody is offering you either criticisms or compliments, make sure you understand the source and respect the source before you worry about what's written. Social media is full of all sorts of people telling you stuff that you really wouldn't listen to them to buy a car. So don't get too hung up about them talking about your career. The second is, and it goes back to an earlier part, we need to meet people who are willing to have an honest, forthright conversation and meet them where they are. This is going to be that way of doing it, be it at a barbecue in your backyard or on a social media blog or on Facebook or the like. If there are people that are there that are willing to have a reasonable conversation where there are perhaps different priorities, but a willingness to understand and share perspectives, that's where you can engage. So seek those people out because you will learn something and you have a chance to teach them something, right? And together you will advance as society. And those that are unwilling to think, unwilling to talk, unwilling to engage, and only criticize, recognize the source and treat it the way it deserves to be treated.
I had written down practice what you preach, but I think in this example, it's actually preach what you practice.
To that end, the one thing I haven't mentioned, talked lots about the Love Alberta Forest campaign. Haven't talked about Work Wild, which is a program that AFPA, Alberta Forest Products Association, has undertaken to actually get into the school system, to talk to our grade school future foresters about the great benefits of being a part of our industry. And that's something we've done pre-COVID. We've had to adjust, obviously, going a bit virtually during COVID, but another platform that really talks about the benefits of the forest sector to society writ large and to Albertans. Yeah, we need more of that, right? Just getting, I think like we were talking about a lot, was in a lot of the rural communities, it's understood, or at least to some extent, it's because it's there every day. It's there. It's a lot of the urban centers that I think it's kind of lost, but we got to start somewhere. So it's the more information out there, the better, right? And the more people talking about it, the better, right? Even the negative comments on social media, they attract more attention, and they get, you know what I mean? Ultimately that's a good thing, because the people who are interested will look into it and realize, oh, well, that comment has no validity whatsoever. And so it's, you know what I mean?
Or maybe it does, and we've got something to respond to.
True. Absolutely true. No, and that was my point before about the whole being seen as part of the solution, part of the future, not being stuck in our ways, willing to change something and not just doing something because it's the way we've always done it, right? And I think we're really good at that, at changing and adapting, and we always have been, but we need to continue to do that, continue to show that we're doing that and point that out, right? I think forest practitioners are really good at doing the right thing for the public, right? Doing the right thing for the public, for all the values, but we're not great at showboating it.
I think what you need to do is donate to Jason.
Yeah.
The preach what you practice, and there's your tagline for phase 2 or phase 3.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because I think it really hits on the point.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Practices aren't the issue.
No, the practices aren't the issue.
It's the preaching part.
The preaching part. Yeah.